Hello, screenwriters. Welcome back to Five Questions with a Screenwriter. And the screenwriter we have with us today is Ben Johnson. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's get started with the questions. Question number one: what are three screenplays every new writer should read, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I'm gonna answer it kind of from what my wheelhouse is, which is thriller, action, adventure. That's kind of what I write most of. For me, the three screenplays that really taught me a lot was number one, Saving Private Ryan. That's a phenomenal screenplay. If you ever want to learn how to write precise but poetic description in the middle of action, it just does such a marvelous job. I can't fault the screenplay. I learned so much just going through it and copying and practicing. The other one that I learned a lot from was Hannah. What a superb screenplay, because it's about a young girl who's being hunted, um, and a lot of action scenes, a lot of martial arts scenes, which are difficult to write, and a lot of people kind of, when they get to action, they get a bit lost. When they get to fight scenes, they get a bit lost. That really helped me kind of figure out how to tell a story through action, so that I'm not just kind of ladling it out and saying this happened and that happened, but even action itself should have some kind of arc. It should build to something. It should tell some kind of story. And then the third one was Warrior, with Tom Hardy. I really love that movie and I love that screenplay because I love mixed martial arts. And that's a mixed martial arts film. And it really taught me about that kind of action, hardcore action, where it's actually about the fight. Um, so, from my point of view, if that's kind of what you're interested in, those are three screenplays I'd recommend. There's so much to learn there, but they're all different. So, Saving Private Ryan is really about massive action, battles, that kind of thing, and how can you describe things in a poetic way, but very precisely. Hannah is more about the feel of the hunt and being hunted and that kind of action and being chased. That's what I learned from there. And then Warrior is really about hand-to-hand combat and how do I write a fight scene that is visceral but draws the reader in as well. So I recommend those three.
You know what? You're the second screenwriter that I've talked to who recommended Saving Private Ryan, so I have to read that screenplay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Question number two: what is something a screenwriter will never learn in a book?
Another interesting question. I'll answer it in an unconventional way, and then I'll answer it in a conventional way. My unconventional answer is you can't learn anything from a book. There's nothing you can learn from a book, because screenwriting is about doing, right? It's a skill, and you can only learn it by doing. You can't learn it by reading it. No more than I can learn to play a piano by reading a book about piano. I've got to actually get behind the piano and I've got to play, I've got to try things out. And screenwriting is no exception. So the idea is not to get book knowledge, but to practice skill and to become adept at that skill to a point where rules become tools, and you can work in and with and outside and within um, all of the parameters to be able to craft a story. So I'd answer it in that way first, that if you think reading a book is going to teach you about screenwriting, writing teaches you about writing. The more you write, the better you become at writing. So the book may give you ideas, it may give you knowledge, but knowledge and skill and experience need to intersect before you can grow. So it's interesting that often, like on Twitter and places like that, you have people that talk and argue about writing a lot, but they don't do a lot of writing. Um, because what works in practice and what works on the page is not on a written page in a book is not the same thing. That's why a lot of people lecture screenwriting, but they've never really sold a screenplay or even written 10 screenplays. So that's my unconventional way of answering the question, what can you learn that's not taught to in a book? I'm saying that everything you learn is outside of the book, really, because you've got to practice it. But then having said that, the other more obvious answer is that one of the things I've learned that you can't learn in a book is the business of screenwriting. And nobody actually talks about that. And I suppose, having said that, I'd say that if you're starting out as a screenwriter, at some point you're going to have to make a decision about whether this is a hobby to you, whether it is an art form for you, or whether it is a business and a career, because those things are completely different and you approach them differently. I mean, if writing is a hobby to you, do whatever you want. Nobody really cares. It's for your enjoyment, right? If you're doing it as an art, possibly you want to try and get a film made and put into a film festival because you're trying to express yourself and you're trying to share your art with other people. But if you really want to do this as a career, nobody tells you about the business of screenwriting. And a lot of people that are artistic lack on the business side. They love the art, but they don't know how to negotiate. They don't know how to price themselves. They don't know how to conduct themselves in a meeting. They don't have the professionalism to deliver on time. Those kinds of things. They don't work well in a team. So it's something I would encourage listeners to really think about at some point. At the beginning, you don't have to stress yourself out. Just enjoy what you're doing. For me, it was different. I immediately knew I wanted to do this with the rest of my life. But not everybody is like that. So take your time, but at some point, you're going to have to decide. But yeah, that's something you won't learn in books, is how to actually negotiate the industry and the business.
That's so true. I remember when I was first learning about screenwriting, I read the scripts and the books and, I wrote. Then afterwards, I'm like, okay, now what? Like, what do I do with the screenplay? And so it is like a whole other challenge navigating the business of screenwriting. So, yeah, all you new screenwriters out there, make sure you set time aside to also learn the business of screenwriting. It's so important. All right, question number 3. What is the greatest character arc you've seen in a story?
I'm a bit of a Game of Thrones nut, so I'd say almost anything that I've seen in Game of Thrones. Jaime Lannister, absolutely hated him at the beginning, bonking his sister, throwing kids out the window. And by the time you get to the end of the story, you love him. He's a hero. You're rooting for him. Um, the Hound, Sandor Clegane, what a monster at the beginning. And by the end, you realize how much he cares for Arya. And you see him in a completely different way. Sansa, who starts out as this innocent, idealistic girl, and by the end, she's learnt a lot about life and about how to be ruthless to survive. Even Daenerys, who starts out as a child, basically in the books, and she becomes the father that she doesn't want to become because the father was the Mad King, and she becomes exactly. So, I mean, you can pick any of those, and they absolutely amaze me. I think that's what George R.R. Martin is really great at, is twisting characters in a completely different direction. And people often compare. I mean, I don't like to compare, but if you look at Lord of the Rings, and you look at his books, I think the main difference for me is that writing had evolved so much by the time George R.R. Martin wrote fantasy, that the idea of much deeper characters and characters being twisted and turned in different directions. I mean, he really did such a great job. Whereas in Lord of the Rings, people kind of are who they are from the beginning to the end. The only person that really and I don't know if he even really arcs that much, is Frodo. You know, he goes through a hell of a lot, and he becomes worldly wise, and he loses his innocence. But yeah, those are arcs that I really respect, and I try to emulate in my writing.
It's interesting you mentioned Game of Thrones. I'm currently rewatching it again for like the third time, I think, and I'm currently on season 6, episode 9. As a matter of fact, the next episode that I'm going to watch that's coming up is Battle of the Bastards,
Yeah. Wow.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned Jamie Lannister. Like, oh, that is a wonderful arc. You're
Mm,
like, who would have thought this guy who throws an innocent kid out the
mm,
window
mm.
while like having ancestral relations with his sister? You would kind of like you would yeah.
Yeah,
So that's great writing. That is great
absolutely.
writing. So that is a great example. Wow. I'm glad you said that. All right. Question number 4. What was the first screenplay you wrote, and what was that writing process like?
Wow. The first screenplay I wrote was a screenplay called Calabash Diplomat, and that was way back in 2009. And it was just at the point where I discovered screenwriting. I didn't know, I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't know about screenwriting because growing up in South Africa, we kind of there were certain jobs that were reserved for the white population, and people of color were kind of engineered and funneled into other jobs. So my community were mostly teachers and artisans and tradesmen. I mean, and I loved television. I loved movies. When I was a kid, I would be absent from school sometimes 120 days because I would run away from school almost every day and go to the movies. I'd go and push shopping carts for people, make some money, and then go and watch movies the entire day. I loved them that much. It's a miracle I made it through school. But never once was it kind of an idea to me that a person could make a living writing movies. It just never occurred to me. And when I finally discovered it and I kind of knew what it was about, I fell so in love with it. And I wrote the screenplay that came out of me in like 3 weeks. The whole thing was there. And it's quite funny because there's there's an organization here called the National Film and Video Foundation, and what they do is they help train writers and they help fund movies, for filmmakers. And I was living on a farm at that time, and this place was in Johannesburg. So I had to take like 2 buses to get there. I arrived in Johannesburg at like 6 in the morning. I didn't even know where the place was, Patrick. I had no idea where it was. I just landed in Johannesburg and thought, I need to find this place because I've written this movie, right? And they need to make this movie because I was so impressed with my own work at that time. So eventually I found this place and I showed them the script, and they laughed at me. They said, "You have no idea what you're doing," basically. But we think that you have talent to tell a story. And they gave me an opportunity, and that's how I went on to study screenwriting. But long story short, what happened is I got funding for that script to rewrite it, and they paired me with the script editor. And we struggled with the script, Patrick. We couldn't get this thing right. I knew I had a story, but I just couldn't get the story onto the page. And eventually, my time with the script editor ended, and I was left alone with this screenplay. And it struck me that it was actually not one story, but it was 2 stories that I was trying to fuse together. And when that kind of came to me, I split the story into two. One became Calabash Diplomat, the second became Canaan, right? And because Canaan kind of grabbed me more than Calabash Diplomat, I went for it and I wrote it. And funny enough, that's the script that won Big Break, right? That's the script that won Big Break, right? And then years after that, like 2024, I went back to Calabash Diplomat and I rewrote it, and that got picked up as well. A producer became interested in that and funded that for rewriting. So that's on the table. So the script I'm busy with, at one of them at the moment, is Canaan, right? Because after winning Big Break, it opened a lot of doors for me and that kind of thing. It got me my manager, all of this stuff, but I never did anything with it. And probably about 3 or 4 months ago, my manager came back to me and said, "Listen, why is that script lying around? Why don't we try and do something? But what I need you to do is I need you to write in a part for an American FBI agent because it's an African story." But he said, "Look, if you're writing a part for American FBI agent, we can get a co-production going between South Africa and the States, and we can get the thing made." So that's kind of, I'm probably going to be done with that by next week, Monday or so. I'll be done with that. That's what I'm doing at the moment. And then I'm going back to Calabash Diplomat to look at that as well because somebody is interested in that. So that's my first screenplay, and that's 2009. It's pretty crazy.
That's an insane story. Like the one screenplay you was written, you realized it was two separate stories, and you
Yeah,
split them. You know, now like both have their own life now.
that's right.
That's such a cool story.
It was crazy, and it's funny that you have those moments, right, where you're struggling with something. And I don't think anything is wasted. I mean, I've got reams of ideas. I've got pages with scenes on that I just really loved. You know, they say kill your darlings. I loved the scene, and then when I had to go to edit, I realized it didn't fit. I just pulled it out and I put it somewhere else. And nothing is ever wasted. And that's kind of what I learned through that. That if you can have the wherewithal and the objectivity to make a hard decision, sometimes it works out for the best. But when you're like really stubborn and insistent, like it's like a puzzle, right? You can't take a puzzle and you got this piece and it doesn't fit, but you're there and you're like hammering the piece, trying to make. If it's meant to be, it kind of just falls into place, and the picture is right. You don't have to distort anything or force anything. And I feel like screenplays are like that. When all the pieces, all the scenes, all the characters, all the plot lines are finally just working seamlessly together, then you have something. And anything that doesn't contribute to that, anything that's butting up against that, take it out rather. It might hurt you, but take it out because it's actually standing in the way of you getting that seamless feel in what you're doing. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I look at it.
No, like it makes perfect sense, and then like just hearing that, you're giving me ideas about my next rewrite.
Awesome.
Uh, all right, we've arrived at the final question. All right, here we go. You get to plan and go on a non-romantic date slash hangout with your current main character. What does that date look like?
Wow. My current character is a really simple, no nonsense, no BS kind of girl. So I feel like if I had to take her out somewhere fancy, she'd probably think I was trying to be pretentious and be really offended by that. But if I did something simple, like maybe just cooked her a nice meal or took her on a picnic, something like that, I think she'd probably enjoy it. But she's quite a guarded person because of everything she's been through. So it'll be a very tension-filled date anyway. It doesn't matter which way I slice it. I've got to be careful what I say. She's always got walls up. I don't know what I'm going to do, Patrick. I mean, I don't know. I'll try and make her laugh or something, and hopefully she'll open up to me a bit. But she's very guarded and very closed off from the world. So it's not going to be a nice date anyway.
It sounds like it would be a challenging time, and
Very.
so it's funny. All right, this has been 5 questions with screenwriter Ben Johnson. Ben, thank you so much. Before we go, I do want to ask you: is there anything you're currently watching that you've watched that you would recommend to our viewers, like either like TV show or film?
I watch a lot of stuff. My kids love movies as well, so I've been taking them through the classics. Things like Casablanca. Movies like that. Maltese Falcon. So we watch the old stuff that's really good, and also movies that I really love. Recently, we watched Joker, the Todd Phillips one. I think that's such an incredible movie. My daughter wants to be a director. My other daughter is a screenwriter like me. So there's a lot of debate here in this house about movies. So that's kind of it. I've just watched again Battlestar Galactica, and it blew me away. I just couldn't. I actually did myself a disservice because when I binge like that, I don't sleep well. I'm watching till 2 in the morning because it's always just one more episode, just one more episode. I
That's
don't think
me.
exactly. I don't think it's a perfect show, but I think it's an incredible show. I think there's so much that you can learn from it. I've also just lined up Penny Dreadful, one of my real favorites, and Westworld. I've got them lined up on my computer. And I'm going to be going back to those as well because I like the horror genre and I like the sci-fi genre, and I'm writing something along that vein at the moment as well. So it all just kind of helps me think. So that's kind of where I am with my watching.
All right, that is a lot of recommendations. So do you guys hear that? Make sure you go in and check out some of these like stories. Um, Ben, I do want to say, is there anything else that you like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I suppose just in closing, because you're trying to inspire and help younger and starting writers. So let me address them with a couple of things that I've learned along the way. And guys, what I've learned wasn't taught to me in a book. I learned it by making mistakes, by falling flat on my face, doing things the wrong way. And that's sometimes the best way to learn. So when I try and advise people, it's never from a point of I know it all, but mostly it's from a point of I messed up a lot of it. And I don't want you to make the same mistake. So yes, a couple of things from me that I hope you'll think about. Number one, try and keep it simple. I see so many starting out screenwriters that want to be Christopher Nolan and they want to be Scorsese and they want to be this one and that one. And you'll get there. But the reality is you can't let your ambition write checks that your skills can't cash. I hope I'm making sense. So sometimes we have big ideas and there's these massive, I even have it, massive stories that happen in our heads that we want to tell. But our craft and our skill is not at a point where we can execute those things well. So then we need to put that on the back burner and we need to be humble and say, listen, let me rather improve my craft so that one day I can come back and I can do justice to the story I'm telling. Because it's better to be clear in your writing, especially when you're trying to attract attention, than to try to be clever in your writing and then you mess it up. Because there are very, very few opportunities. If you manage through a competition or whatever to get your writing in front of somebody who matters, like a shot caller, you want to impress them by giving them your best writing. And when you're overly ambitious and you don't understand the limits of your skills, what you kind of saying to them is that you don't understand yourself as a writer, and you're not willing to take things easy. You're not willing to learn step by step. So that's the first thing. Keep it simple. Rather write a simple story. Do the 3-act structure. Once you have mastered that, then you've earned the right to do something more complex and mess around with 50 different timelines and all of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is that you need to learn to love writing, not just the idea of being a writer. Writing is a difficult journey full of a lot of challenges. And if you're not going to throw in the towel, it's going to be because you love this craft so much, you cannot give it up. And it brings you back to the table and the computer to write over and over again, no matter how much disappointment gets thrown at you, no matter how bad the notes are, you can't help but write because you love writing and you love storytelling. There are so many people who are in love with the idea of themselves being a writer, but they don't actually love writing, the struggle of writing. They want to have written. They don't want to write. So be in love with writing.
Brainstorm, break it down, make a dream, create a scene with Stratword.